Our first speaker is going to be Robert. Um, he is going to talk to us all about the sort of the big enhancements for Docker support in Flower that's now available. So over to Robert.
Thanks, Nick. Welcome, everyone. Today, we want to share some exciting updates we have made to our Docker images. So let's start with our new images. So with the next Flower version 1.9, we will release the first version of our new Docker images, Superlink, Supernode, and Server App. That's a big step because the new images enable everyone to deploy Flower end-to-end in Docker in a production environment. With the upcoming release, we will also deprecating our current server and client images. The server image becomes the superlink and the client becomes the supernode. You can already migrate to the superlink image today. We released a 1.8 superlink image that is identical to the 1.8 server image. The client image is a bit different because it was never publicly announced, but if you have used it, make sure to switch to the Supernode image after the next Flower release. If you have any problems, then just reach out to us on Slack, GitHub, or Flower Discuss. We plan to release Flower 1.9 within the next 2 weeks, but you can already try out our new images by checking out the nightly images. The nightly image contain the latest Flower nightly, and they are available for all three images. But please keep in mind that Flower nightly is not considered stable, so please don't use it in production. In addition to Ubuntu, we will also release Alpine images. Alpine describes itself as lightweight and security oriented. Compared to other base images, it's smaller and has less security vulnerabilities, which makes it perfect for production environments. I will also show later some numbers. We also reworked our current Ubuntu image to make it more secure and smaller. We are now using multi-stage builds where we first compile the Python and then remove the Python binary to a fresh Ubuntu base. And the advantage here is that all the dependencies that are required for compiling Python are not part of the final image anymore. We also removed pyenv from the image. We still use it for compiling Python, but it's not part of the final image. And last but important, all the new images will run by default with a non-root user. You can still run the container with a root user if you want to, during development, for example, but we highly recommend to use a non-root user when running in a production environment. Going to the next slide, we can see the comparison of the Superliga image and all so the comparisons in size for all images for the Superlink image. So we have on the first bar, we have the old Ubuntu image, which is roughly 400 megabyte in size. Next to it, we have the new Ubuntu image. It's 200 or roughly 200 megabytes. So we almost halved the size here, which is a huge improvement. The Alpine AMD 64 is even better. That's only 64. And the Alpine ARM 64 is unfortunately a bit bigger because the binary for the gRPC library is a lot larger. And it's also noticeably slower to build because gRPC IO doesn't provide pre-built binaries for Alpine ARM64, so we have to compile it from source. On the next slide, we can see the enormous progress in reducing vulnerabilities. So on the first row, we can see the old Ubuntu image, which had a lot of vulnerabilities. The main cause was the dependencies that we installed for compiling Python. They are not anymore part in the new images. What you can see here for Ubuntu New and Alpine, the medium and low vulnerabilities, that is nothing that we have introduced. They are also part of the Ubuntu and Alpine base image. And if I'm not mistaken, they all are not fixable. For the high vulnerabilities for Alpine and Ubuntu New, one of them is pip. It's also not fixable. And the other one in Ubuntu is setup tools, although that's a false positive because in one layer we install that specific version that is vulnerable to or has a security issue. But in a later layer, we actually install a newer version, but it's still flagged as a security vulnerability. But that's not part of the final image then. On the next slide, we can see the images that we will support. So for the superlink, we will use the so if we use a base image with Python 3.11 and Ubuntu. We will also use a Python 3.11 and Alpine image. And for nightly, we will always use Python 3.11 and Ubuntu. Uh, we will upgrade to a newer Python version when we also upgrade the support in Flower. So for the Superlink, you can expect that it will be always the latest Python version that we support in Flower. For Supernode and Server App, we will support all the versions that we also support in Python. So from 3 to 3, 3.8 through 3.11. They are all based on the Ubuntu image. And we will also have a nightly image, and there we use Python 3.11. So you might wonder why we only offer Alpine for the Superlink image. And the reason for that is on the next slide that Alpine and machine learning frameworks currently don't work really well together. Um, so Alpine internally uses muscle instead of glibc, and most ML frameworks don't provide pre-built binaries for this combination. So what we often end up is that in the container, we will need to install all the dependencies like GCC and CMake and so on to compile these frameworks from source within the container. And that often results in bigger image size and also a bigger attack surface because we have all the additional dependencies. So that's the reason why we decided against having Alpine images for the Supernode and Server App for now. Maybe we will also add this later. All right, yeah, I think that's for me today. Um, you can check out our new images. You can check out the nightly images. Um, I just want to mention that it's the first version that we release. So we will continue to improve our images in terms of security, make them smaller, and also in the experience to make it easier to work with them. And if you have any questions, ideas, feedback, then please reach out to us on Slack, GitHub, or Flower Discuss.
Great. Well, thank you so much. That was really interesting to see what's happened with Docker support in Flower. And I know this is a reaction to a lot of user questions and interest in being able to do this in various types of, in particular, production settings. So it's great. Um, for those of you who are sort of with us live, feel free to post your questions if there are any in the Slack channel that we have for Flower Monthly, or we keep things pretty casual here, so feel free to raise your hand now if you want to ask a question, and I'll unmute you and you can just ask Robert directly. I see we have a question here in the Q&A. Let me just pop this open here. And the question is, where can I find an example of how to use the Docker images?
Yeah,
And does the documentation have a complete example?
yeah. So you can visit our Flower docs, which is the second link, and there you can also find an example. We also have one example that we will use for end-to-end tests. It's a Docker Compose. And that's also available in our repository. And I think I have to look this up, but you can find a Docker Compose file that also uses those images and show a whole example.
Thank you, Robert. This is really awesome stuff.
Thank
Um,
you.
Great.